Family, let me talk to the heart of a woman who has loved deeply, carried quietly, forgiven repeatedly, and stood faithfully, even when it cost her more than she ever admitted out loud. Because when a chosen woman is hurt by a man, it doesn't just bruise her feelings. It shakes something spiritual, something sacred, something God ordained within her. And sometimes you don't even realize the weight of what you survived until God starts revealing the strength that was hiding underneath your pain. A chosen woman is not like everybody else. Her spirit is different. Her heart is different. Her calling is different. And because of that, her breaking looks different and her rising looks even greater. When a chosen woman is hurt, God does not leave her in that place. He begins to move in ways that confuse the enemy, silence the pain, and elevate her into a version of herself she didn't know she was capable of becoming. There are things heaven responds with when a chosen woman is mistreated. Things that shift her identity, things that awaken her discernment, things that realign her destiny, things that prepare her for the love, the purpose, the healing, and the future she truly deserves. So as we step into this message, understand this: your hurt was not the end of you. Your heartbreak was not your downfall. What happened to you is about to produce strength, clarity, power, and divine movement you couldn't have reached any other way. When a man hurts a chosen woman, God starts shifting everything around her and everything within her. Let me tell you what begins to happen next. Family, when God awakens a chosen woman's discernment and removes her blind spots after she's been hurt, it is one of the most powerful spiritual transformations she will ever experience. Because a chosen woman doesn't just love with her heart, she loves with her spirit. She sees potential where others see problems. She gives chances where others walk away. She nurtures what is broken. She believes in what is hidden. She pours into what is unfinished. And because her heart is wired to build, she often overlooks warning signs, red flags, and inconsistencies, not because she's weak, but because she's loyal. Not because she's desperate, but because she's pure-hearted. Not because she's naive, but because she's hopeful. When a woman like that is hurt, God doesn't just heal her, He wakes her up. Discernment is the gift God gives to a chosen woman after she's been wounded. Before the hurt, she may have ignored her intuition. She may have silenced her spirit. She may have compromised her standards. She may have believed words over patterns. She may have excused behaviors because she saw the good in him. But when the hurt comes, something shifts. Pain has a way of sharpening what comfort allowed to stay dull. Suddenly, God begins showing her things she didn't see before. He reveals motives she overlooked. He exposes intentions she misread. He highlights patterns she tolerated, and it's not to shame her, it's to protect her. Discernment is heaven's response to a woman who gave genuine love and received brokenness in return. When a chosen woman is hurt, God gently removes the scales from her spiritual eyes. She begins to see clearly the traits she used to justify. She sees the selfishness she convinced herself was stress. She sees the manipulation she labeled as misunderstanding. She sees the inconsistency she excused as busyness. She sees the emotional immaturity she tried to be patient with. She sees the lack of accountability she brushed aside because she believed he would eventually grow. God began showing her that what she called potential was actually a distraction. What she called compatibility was actually convenience. What she called connection was actually a trauma bond. Blind spots disappear when truth arrives. A chosen woman's heart is deep, and because of that, her blind spots were often tied to her compassion. She loved so deeply that she saw him through the lens of what he could become, not who he actually was. God removing blind spots doesn't just mean she now sees him clearly. It means she now sees herself clearly. She sees her own pattern. She sees where she ignored red flags to feel needed. She sees where she gave too much hoping it would heal him. She sees where she abandoned her own needs to support his inconsistencies. She sees where she tolerated what violated her spirit. That clarity is not punishment, it is empowerment. It is God saying, daughter, never again will you lose yourself trying to love someone who refuses to grow. Discernment becomes her protection. Before, she gave people the benefit of the doubt. After God awakens her, she gives people the benefit of distance until they prove otherwise. She no longer confuses chemistry with character. She no longer confuses attention with intention. She no longer confuses apologies with change. She no longer confuses consistency with convenience. She learns to watch what a man does, not what he says. And here's the beautiful part. Discernment doesn't make her hard, it makes her wise. It doesn't make her bitter, it makes her selective. It doesn't make her guarded, it makes her guided. A chosen woman with awakened discernment doesn't shut down her heart. She just refuses to give it to the wrong hands again. She moves with a new kind of strength, a new kind of clarity, a new kind of intuition that feels like God himself whispering inside her spirit. When God awakens a chosen woman's discernment, she no longer wants what hurt her. She no longer chases what drains her. She no longer settles for what confuses her. She no longer entertains what disturbs her peace. She no longer feels attached to what she once prayed would work. Her desires shift, her standards strengthen, her spirit becomes louder. She becomes spiritually allergic to situations that dishonor her worth. God removes blind spots by revealing truth, and sometimes that truth is painful. She may see that she was holding on to a version of him that only existed in her imagination. She may see that she was romanticizing potential that was never going to manifest. She may see that she was pouring into someone who could not pour back. She may see that she was expecting emotional consistency from someone who wasn't emotionally stable. But painful clarity is better than comfortable deception. God loves her too much to leave her blind. Discernment also awakens her boundaries. A chosen woman with awakened discernment knows her spirit cannot thrive in chaos. She knows her heart cannot survive inconsistency. She knows her peace is too valuable to be sacrificed. She knows her calling is too important to be delayed. She knows her energy is too sacred to be drained. She no longer entertains half love, half effort, or half truth. Her no becomes stronger. Her yes becomes intentional. Her time becomes guarded. Her heart becomes prioritized. God also awakens discernment by sending confirmation. After a chosen woman is hurt, everything that was unclear becomes obvious. Suddenly, she starts hearing God in places she ignored him before. She sees signs she used to overlook. She notices patterns she used to excuse. People around her start revealing things. Circumstances begin exposing truth. Conversations she wasn't ready for finally make sense. God keeps confirming what she didn't want to believe until she can no longer deny it. This affirmation doesn't break her, it liberates her. Discernment brings alignment. A chosen woman begins to recognize what aligns with her spirit and what disturbs it. She sees which environments drain her. She sees which conversations trigger her. She sees which habits keep her stuck. She sees which relationships keep her small. She sees which voices feed her faith and which ones feed her fear. Discernment becomes her internal compass, pointing her away from what is harmful and toward what is holy. When God awakens a chosen woman's discernment, he also awakens her intuition, the spiritual sensitivity she used to silence. Before she was hurt, she second-guessed herself. She doubted her instincts. She overrode her feelings to keep the peace. She convinced herself she was being too sensitive. But after God removes the blind spots, she learns to trust her spirit. She learns that her gut was actually God. She learns that her hesitation was a warning. She learns that her discomfort was discernment trying to protect her long before the hurt ever came. As discernment grows, she becomes spiritually mature. She recognizes when someone is coming with false intentions. She senses when someone's words don't match their spirit. She hears the tone beneath the tone. She sees the motive beneath the gesture. She becomes harder to deceive, harder to manipulate, harder to fool, harder to take advantage of, not because she's cynical, but because she's awakened. Discernment also restores her confidence. When her blind spots are removed, she stops blaming herself for what happened. She stops carrying guilt for someone else's brokenness. She stops believing she deserved the hurt. She realizes she wasn't unworthy. She was unprotected. She wasn't difficult. She was depleted. She wasn't naive. She was hopeful. With clarity comes healing. With healing comes confidence. With confidence comes power. Family, when God awakens a chosen woman after she's been hurt, she becomes unstoppable. She becomes the kind of woman who no longer falls for potential. She waits for consistency. She no longer entertains confusion. She honors peace. She no longer settles for crumbs. She expects reciprocity. She no longer loses herself. She chooses herself. She no longer doubts her worth. She embodies it. And she no longer lets blind spots guide her. She lets discernment lead her steps. What hurt her becomes what wakes her. What broke her becomes what builds her. What confused her becomes what clarifies her. And what wounded her becomes what God uses to elevate her identity, her wisdom, her strength, and her spirit. Family, when a chosen woman has been hurt, one of the first and most powerful things God does is rebuild her value, her identity, and her confidence. Not according to the version of herself she had to be in that relationship, but according to the version he always knew she was becoming. Hurt has a way of distorting the mirror a woman looks into. It convinces her she is too much or not enough. It whispers that she failed, tells her she wasn't worthy of love or consistency. It tries to attach shame to her heart, blame to her spirit, and doubt to her identity. But God never lets a chosen woman stay in that distorted reflection. After the hurt, he begins a slow, sacred reconstruction of who she truly is. A chosen woman often loved so deeply that she ends up sacrificing pieces of herself just to keep the connection alive. She gives even when she's running on empty. She fights for the relationship when she is the only one putting in the work. She seeks understanding when she is the one being misunderstood. And somewhere in that process, she begins to internalize the belief that her love wasn't enough, that her worth wasn't enough, that her presence wasn't enough. Hurt tries to convince her that the man's actions were a reflection of her value instead of his brokenness. But God refuses to let her dwell in that lie. When God begins rebuilding her identity, he separates who she is from what she went through. The version of her that was hurt is not the definition of who she is. It is simply proof of how deeply she could love. God begins to whisper reminders into her spirit, calling her back to herself. He reminds her that she is chosen, not overlooked. He reminds her that she is worthy, not disposable. He reminds her that she is needed, not tolerated. He reminds her that she is whole, even if someone mishandled her heart. As God rebuilds her identity, he dismantles the false narratives the hurt created. The narrative that she was the problem. The narrative that she wasn't lovable. The narrative that she wasn't enough. The narrative that she should have been quieter or smaller or less emotional or less expressive or less herself. These narratives break in the light of God's truth. He shows her that her capacity to love was not the issue. The issue was that she gave it to someone who wasn't ready or mature enough to receive it. He shows her that her compassion wasn't a weakness, it was a reflection of her anointing. He shows her that her loyalty wasn't foolish, it was sacred. When God rebuilds a chosen woman's identity, he also rebuilds her relationship with herself. Hurt disconnects a woman from her own soul. She stops trusting her intuition. She stops believing she deserves more. She stops honoring her needs. She stops listening to her spirit. But God gently leads her back home to herself. He teaches her how to love herself again, how to trust herself again, how to see herself again. She begins to remember her strength. She begins to remember her beauty. She begins to remember her intelligence, her creativity, her voice, her purpose. She realizes that the version of herself she lost in the relationship is now emerging stronger than ever. Confidence is the fruit that grows from rebuilt identity. But confidence doesn't return all at once. It returns in layers. First, she begins to speak differently to herself. She stops using the language of doubt and starts using the language of truth. She stops saying, maybe I deserved it, and starts saying, I deserve better. She stops saying, I should have known, and starts saying, I learned what I needed to learn. She stops saying, I'm broken, and starts saying, I'm healing. Then confidence shows up in her boundaries. A chosen woman with renewed confidence no longer negotiates with disrespect. She no longer tolerates mixed signals. She no longer makes excuses for inconsistencies. She no longer gives chances to people who have already shown her their character. Her confidence allows her to say no when her spirit is disturbed, and yes, only when her peace is protected. She begins to expect what she once settled for excuses around. Her standards rise not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Confidence also shows up in her presence. You can hear it in her voice. You can see it in her posture. You can feel it in her energy. She walks into rooms differently. She carries herself with a level of grace that only comes from surviving what should have broken her. Her smile returns, not the smile she puts on for others, but the smile that flows from her own soul. Her spirit becomes lighter. Her eyes become brighter. She becomes a woman who knows who she is, what she carries, and what she will no longer tolerate. Another part of rebuilding confidence is restoring her belief in her future. Hurt tries to convince her that love is dangerous and vulnerability is risky, but God begins to expand her vision again. He shows her that the end of one connection is not the end of her destiny. He shows her that heartbreak does not disqualify her from love. It positions her for the right kind. He shows her that what she lost cannot even compare to what he is preparing. A chosen woman does not stay in sadness forever. She rises into expectation. Identity rebuilding also means she no longer defines herself by how someone else treated her. She realizes that the man who hurt her did not have the authority to name her. He did not have the power to determine her worth. He did not have